Hi everyone, I'm Rhonda Weisberg with Channel 63, and I'd like to welcome you to another segment of Up Close and Personal. Today I have the pleasure of presenting you someone who I've just begun to get to know myself. He's one of the newer members of BallenIsles. He and his very, very lovely wife, Joanne, have been residents here now for a few months. Hail from New Jersey, am I correct? And I think you're in for a very, very interesting segment here. Ted is, as I said, he's from New Jersey. He retired from his main source of business, and I'm going to get into that in a moment, but he's got a very interesting story. Hi, Ted.
Pleasure, thank you.
My pleasure. Ted, when I think about the things you've done in life, it has occurred to me that most of us have maybe one or two opportunities to do what we really enjoy doing. And many of us, although we might have made a nice living, can't always say that we really enjoyed the process. When I think about you and all that you have told me, you're one of the luckiest guys. Because, as I see it, you've had a chance to reinvent yourself a couple of times beyond your initial source of income. And each time it seems to have gotten better and better, different and more different, and you've got a lot to say about that. Am I correct?
Probably, yeah.
Okay, good.
I actually never thought about it, but
Well,
yeah,
I did the
right.
thinking
You're
for
right.
you. It's okay. It's
Okay.
okay. So let's share a little bit of that with the 63 audience. In talking about your background, as a young fellow, you graduated graduate school, and you had a purpose in mind. What was your first goal?
First goal was to get an education, obviously, to, I sort of floundered around for a while. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And then as I was in graduate school, I just kept getting new degrees in order to avoid the draft, actually. They were coming after me, and as long as I was in education, getting degrees, they would leave me alone and let me finish. But somewhere along the line, I decided I really wanted a degree in both computer science and in political science. So I went to Michigan to get a couple of master's degrees. And when I left with those degrees, I started working at the Library of Congress. Interesting job. They had, it was the information degree. I was one of 7 people that was selected in the country for this internship. But while I was through the internship, just as I finished the 6-month internship, the New York Times came to the Library of Congress and said, we're looking for a researcher to head up our Washington bureau. And so I don't know whether or not it was a distinction or the library wanted to get rid of me, but there were 4,000 people working there. They said, of the 4,000, please take Ted Slate. So I went and I was introduced to a man who you may be familiar with, James Reston. I met James Reston, Arthur Kroc, and Russell Baker, who was a columnist, wrote an Observer column, and then he did a Masterpiece Theater. And I started working at the New York Times and loved it, absolutely loved it. From there, Russell got me another job. He recommended me for a position at Newsweek, where I spent a couple of years at the New York Times in Washington, and then I went to Newsweek as head of their research library. And it was there that I spent 29 years, and they kept piling additional responsibilities. I left the research library situation, and they made me eventually, I became head of the factual accuracy of the magazine. If you needed somebody to go to court to fight something where we're being sued, I was the one because it was my staff. I was responsible for about 85 people. So that job grew, and I loved that job. But one thing that happened is that I kept wanting to travel, and the urge was greater. While I loved Newsweek, after 29 years, I felt I wasn't really leaving them in the lurch. So I quit, gave a notice, and I started to, I signed on as a tour director, actually. I took people around the world and lectured. And for 15 years, I worked for the Smithsonian and a couple of other companies, and they sent me everywhere. So I traveled the world on someone else's dime. I learned a lot. You should see me now when the travel section on Jeopardy comes up. That's
a winner,
right.
A winner. But let's go back just a little bit about that. I understand that you felt it was time to leave Newsweek.
Correct.
There's something interesting that went on when you were applying for jobs as a tour director. It didn't just happen overnight.
Didn't. No, I'd had experience going back in 1973 while I was at Newsweek. I was going through a divorce, and I had all this vacation. So my secretary said, you know, I worked as a part-time travel agent. Give you an introduction to our travel company, and maybe they could use you to take people around the world. You might enjoy that gig. So I did that, and I said, I love this. So maybe at some point later on in life, it's something I might do. So when I decided to leave Newsweek, I sent out 19 letters. And 10 of them received no reply whatsoever. 9 people said not interested. And I figured, my God, 2 master's degrees. I had a responsible position at Newsweek. So they weren't interested. So I was at University of North Carolina. They were considering me for a job in the journalism department. And I got a call from a company in Boston asking me if I was able to take some people either to India or China in 2 weeks. And I said, you know, I can't. I waited. It's been months since I sent my original letter to you, and I need some time to just close up my business at Newsweek. So he said, how about we have something in December? Take a group of people on a Celebrity Meridian, a cruise through the Caribbean. So I said, fine. I said goodbye to North Carolina, and that started me on 15 years. Since then, I've done 51 cruises, and I've been to all over the world, and with hilarious. I think some of the situations were hilarious, and I write about that in my book.
Right.
And the book is basically a collection of 65 short essays, and I would say most of them are humorous, but that's for you to judge. And there's some that really plucked my heartstrings. They were really pretty emotionally
near and dear.
Yeah.
Well, you jumped right ahead to the third career here. So as far as the tour director, I just want to finish that up. I know you had some very humorous situations there. I think the first one was the dental convention. Was that am I correct?
Oh, that was back in 1973 when I took a group of periodontists on a cruise through the Caribbean.
Right.
And it was the head of dental medicine, University of Pennsylvania. He was the lecturer, and my job was to make sure that the ship provided him with all the things he needed to do his lectures. So I hadn't decided on a career as a tour director or to leave my job as a tour director for a tour directing job. But when that cruise came to an end, and his name is Jay Siebert, very big, formidable person in the area of periodontists, he finished up his lecture, and he was putting his things away, and the other periodontists who were listening to him, who were with him for the week, they were clapping, and then he proceeds to take out of his attaché case, and he tells the staff, he tells the group, he said, the woman who I had treated for those, he showed the slides of her mouth for 5 days. The woman I had treated willed her mouth to me. So he takes out of his attaché case, he takes out her jaws, her mandibles, with her teeth implanted, and puts it on the table. And I'm in the back. I had to really hold myself so I just wouldn't laugh out loud. But I noticed that there were tears welling up in the eyes of the periodontist, because what greater gift can a patient give a doctor, other than the proctologist maybe, but what greater gift can you give the doctor than that part he's been treating?
Yeah, not quite the brain to science, but
it was
something of that nature.
I thought this was great.
So you kind of proved that tour directing is not just let's everybody get off the ship and look at the Eiffel Tower on the right-hand side. There was much more to it. You really got involved in their businesses.
Oh, sure. It's, there's a concept in management called the effect of the man on the job, or the person on the job these days. And what it means is that each person can change a job materially by inserting their own their personality, their whatever they're made of, put it into that job, and they can change it materially. I could do the job a lot differently, the same job that someone else might do, because of my personality versus theirs. Yeah. That's
for sure. So let's fast forward then to somewhat end of tour director. Do you still do the tour directing if you get a call for something like that?
I get calls, I get advice. One thing about, I get advice from people who I pay for their time, like doctors. Mm-hmm. Doctors, they know I travel, so they ask me, well, where would you go, Ted? Australia or New Zealand or what? And yet, I pay for their time, And I always feel sometimes, well, you're on the clock now, Dr. So-and-so.
Yeah.
I'll tell you.
Try to collect on that
Try
one.
to collect on that,
Exactly.
is
You
right.
might get a few
But I don't
perks
do that
along the way.
anymore.
Okay.
But,
So here you are now. Now you're in Florida, but this actually took place before coming to Florida.
Correct.
How long ago did you start this book? This book, by the way, is called My Life and Other Aggravations. Very, very apropos.
Well, one of my trips, and the one that is, I don't find, there wasn't a lot of humor in it, but one that I only cried twice in all the years, 15 years as a tour director, I cried twice, both times in Vietnam. Two things hit me that really were emotionally, I think, draining. One was a place where children, all of whom were affected by Agent Orange, where they worked producing artifacts, things that people could purchase while they were visiting Vietnam. And the other was a soldier who went back to Hanoi, and he was on the trip, and in Saigon, he went to the Cu Chi tunnels. And these were a series of 100 miles of tunnels, about 25 miles outside of Saigon, where they call them tunnel rats, where they had ferreted out. They had guys go into these tunnels. It was a rat's nest. Our soldiers would walk along, figuring they're on safe, solid ground. They'd step on a piece of ground that suddenly sunk in. They would fall on these punji sticks, and they would be impaled on them, and it was horrendous.
And is that story here in the book?
The stories are in there.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the
what
book then
happened is I
has-
wrote every night. To answer your question, every night I was so emotionally drained by this. Every night I had to get it out, and I sat down at the hotels and sent emails back. And people, when I got back after the trip, they said, you know, these emails were terrific. Why don't you write a column about your travels? And so I went to a local paper, the Warren Reporter, which was the county newspaper of Warren County, New Jersey. Spoke to the editor, and I said, I'd like to do a column about and I showed him the various, they were not humor columns. I showed him
But that was the impetus for the book.
That's correct.
those columns.
I started out as it was called Travels with Ted. And that as I did that, I don't know what happened, but I got older, I got angrier, things really started to bother me. I hated the way older people were being treated in society, and I started writing their pieces in there that deal with that, some of them on a humorous vein, and essentially, those were my aggravations. And I changed the name of the column from Travels with Ted to My Life and Other Aggravations.
Makes sense. So this then is the, I won't say certainly last, but this is the third segment of your work career, writing this book. It's fascinating. It's adorable. There are tears. There's laughter. I would recommend that everyone within BallenIsles have the opportunity to own this book, read it,
Me too. I would
enjoy it.
recommend
Yeah,
that
I think
as well,
that's
yes.
just a great idea. As I mentioned, you're new to the community. After this interview, I dare say there'll be people who will come up to you and say, will you autograph my book? And I'd like to talk with you further about maybe some things that they could contribute to what looks to be an upcoming book to continue the chapter of life of Ted Slate.
Well, I've already got to put a lot of things together for my next
Great.
book.
Ted, thank you so very much.
My pleasure.
It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely.
And we look forward to more conversation with you.
And more aggravations.
And more aggravations.
That's great.